Friday, we reported the Army Spokesperson Major General Felix Kulayigye warning individuals and groups of people against engaging in electoral violence in next year's general elections. He said they are ready to handle with the necessary force whoever will try to engage in violence. Now, his argument was hinged on the violence that was witnessed in the recent NRM primaries to vote flag bearers who would compete for various elective positions. And I'm now joined by Chemonges, a policy analyst who is also the executive director at the Center for Policy Analysis, to discuss and help us understand if this warning can actually be heard. Good evening to you, Timothy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be here. To
start with, what is your take on the General's warning?
I think that first, it's good that the Army is coming out to make a position, make statements really towards the peace, but also for the general conduct of the elections. What I understand, what I see it falls short is on the blame towards the citizens and the blame towards the people, especially the electorate. Because what we've seen is that the Army has also been heavily involved in contributing, in sometimes being able to see through some of this violence, especially in the sense of being partisan, but also in the sense of sometimes being overly high-handed. And in result, the people, fight back, and we have casualties, and in the sense of sometimes having the whole process militarized, and with that the electoral process entirely loses the democratic intention, but also the aggregated vision of the people as envisioned in the Constitution.
Okay, and now looking at the elections that we've had, the Kawempe by-election and the recent NRM primaries, there is the recurring element of election violence and there's so many other elections that we've had as a country. And so one would wonder, what is the root cause of these recurring violences in the elections?
I think it's because our politics has since become such a high-stake business that any person involved, or even presenting themselves to this, for most of these platforms, their intention is to win. And that we are having overly subscribed system for elections, and in turn we've seen institutions of government, institutions of the state, including some of the army, being in a way, while ensuring there's peace and security, we see that there's a sense in which they seem to be partisan in many times, and even in their desire to enforce peace, there's a sense in which sometimes the enforcement is selective. A case in point is what we've just had recently, the by-election in Kawempe.
Yes.
Where we saw the army really being overly high-handed, and sometimes for no reason really. You have citizens participating in the process peacefully, and the army comes from nowhere. They're beating everyone for the reason that no one really understands. But I think for me it's partly because of the lack of accountability systems, where we see the army heavily involved in this process, the individuals, and there is no accountability. What we see is what Kulayigye General keeps saying. These are the remarks that we keep saying, that we shall act, we are issuing warnings. I think that individuals who are involved in perpetrating this sort of violence, the citizens should be held accountable, but more importantly, because it's upon the state and its arms to ensure that there is peace and security. If they end up being agents of violence, they should be held accountable. I think that this statement should not just be a PR stunt. We need to see more action. We need to see the army and the security forces being the disciplined forces, as they should be, but also as envisaged in the Constitution.
Yes, and we did hear the General himself clearly. He sounded the warning even to the voters, saying that they will not tolerate any kind of violence, and also to you know, because there's some politicians that have, you know, used the army as protection. He also did sound a warning to that. But I'd like us to talk about money in politics. Last week, one of the honorables who crossed from the FDC to the NRM said that he had to part with about 300 million shillings. Many also say they have to part with at least 500 million shillings in a bid to woo their voters. Yeah. And I would like us to understand, what does this mean for our democracy?
I think that this compromises greatly the decision of the electorate to have leaders who they can hold accountable, but leaders who can truly represent the interest of the people. Because what Honorable Akol highlights, it's definitely true, and I think that is among the average members of parliament spending that kind of money. We've seen in the past where candidates spending up to 1 billion shillings. We see the stakes, really, the monetization process of politics has become over and above what's expected. To that end, the electoral process ceases to be issues that ideally the voters should be voting to, and now the whole process around the money. Of course, when we look at the study by one of the organizations, ACFIM, on the cost of elections in the country, it clearly states that in the last election, aggregated total, we spent close to 4 trillion of all the elected leaders, including the candidates that didn't make it. And the cost has kept on increasing. But also this should be also looked at from the perspective that the highly competitive nature of our politics, where you see that even those that are running for these offices, the objective is not to serve the people. The objective is to secure the bag. And to that end, everyone is willing to spend their last coin to get into those offices. What that means is that the whole process subsequently, both pre and the post-election, is adulterated, and we shall not see any service delivery. Ultimately, you see that with the kind of investment that we are having, the elected leaders definitely will be working towards recouping what they have invested. And so this ceases to be an electoral process, and it becomes a sort of a business, really.
And also for someone that has invested as much as 1 billion shillings, imagine when they lose, you know, that kind of violence that comes that comes about with it. But also, I would like us to know instances where there is, say, an election, say 2026. Are there mechanisms for us to tell early warnings of a potential violence, and how can we, you know, sort of curb it before it can actually happen?
I think, you see, the question of violence and violence, really, it's on the Constitution is very clear on who should be able to provide leadership in this. The police is definitely given this mandate to protect both life and property, and where need be, of course, the other security agencies can offer support. And really, it's upon them. And we think that looking at the resources that are available, looking at the preparations, there should be efforts in the police together with the other security agencies to understand the landscape, to understand what is required and what support is needed from them. I think that all is really available, and it should be in the highest interest of the country to ensure that we have peaceful and fair elections as we go towards the general elections.
Well, you did mention earlier that the perpetrators of this, you know, violence, malpractice, and, you know, all this usually are not brought to book, and that only highlights the gaps that we have when it comes to enforcing our laws in regards to, you know, electoral violence, electoral disputes. And so, what do you think can be done to ensure that such issues are dealt with?
So I think that first of all, it goes back to action. I think that General Kulayigye and his group should go and act, put their house into order, ensure that their officers comply and do what is required of them. And they should go with the attitude of protecting, as opposed to causing violence in some of these processes. Because ultimately what that means is that the citizens are shortchanged, and this is to be a fair electoral process. Of course, it also comes from the sense of there's need a lot of sensitization, voter education by the Electoral Commission, which unfortunately has not happened. The Electoral Commission, we are a few months to the general elections. There's been very little or no voter education, and it's really up to them, because that falls on them. So there's need for better mechanisms for most of these recommendations, which we've continuously seen in the previous elections. They should be put into action. But also, more importantly, I think that all of us, both the state and the people, the bare minimum is the law, and the law has set a threshold for which all of us must comply. All right,
Timothy, in your parting shot, many fear of what the 2026 general elections will look like, because from the by-elections that we had to the NRM primaries, it looks like it is a rehearsal script for what is awaiting us when it comes to 2026 general elections. Just as your parting shot, what would your comment be on that?
I think that this presents us as a country with an opportunity, because we've seen what is happening and the likelihood of what is likely to happen if nothing is put into action. And therefore, I think that on the side of state, there must be an assurance of peaceful elections, that the state will put all what is required to ensure that we have peaceful elections, the citizens are protected, but also there is equal participation in this process. Ultimately, I think that because the elections are so much central in our democracy.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of holding, but also bringing the leadership account. And so I think for me is going back to ensuring that the law is adhered to, but also the actors, there must be goodwill by all sides to ensure that we have a peaceful elections where all of us are proud and are willing to be part of the process.
All right. Thank you, Timothy Chemonges, a policy analyst who is also the executive director at the Center for Policy Analysis, for those wonderful remarks. Well, with that, we take another break. When we return, we'll be hearing from the world of sport.